The year is 1998, and both Armageddon and Deep Impact are getting us ready for the inevitable future where an asteroid destroys humanity. This is also the year that brought us Sex and the City, a Whopper made for left-handed people, and the Offspring, who were pretty fly for a white guy. But we're not here to ask for a 13 and draw a 31, because today we're counting down Electronic Gaming Monthly's best reviewed games of 1998. Give it to me, baby. Like a lot of EGM best and worst episodes, we're starting the list with a tie I can't break. Colony Wars and Oddworld Abe's Exoddus may be worlds apart when it comes to gameplay and genre, but they do have one thing in common. They both averaged a score of 9.25 out of 10, which was just enough to beat out heavy hitters like Tomb Raider 2, Xenogears, F-Zero X, and Final Fantasy Tactics. Yeah, bet you didn't see that coming. Colony Wars was one of those games that really snuck up on people and surprised everybody. I think Sean puts it best. I'm not the biggest fan of flight games, but Colony Wars has done so well and is so fun to play that I couldn't help but get into it. That's an opinion echoed throughout the rest of the reviews. Craig notes that all too often a game excels at graphics or gameplay, but not both. Such is not the case with Colony Wars, which is top-notch in just about every way. Sushi X, on the other hand, liked that Colony Wars pushed the PlayStation hardware in amazing ways, but wasn't as high on the game. While everybody else was giving the game a 9.5, he was the odd man out with an 8.5, complaining that there were just too many flight boundaries. Now, when it comes to Oddworld Abe's Exoddus, everybody agreed that the sequel is everything the previous game was and more. The odd part of these reviews is how many complaints the critics had. Sean mentioned the annoying trial and error puzzles. Crispin called this more of a mission pack than a proper sequel, and Dan noted that it's just more of the same. The good news is that the EGM editors weren't sick of more of the same, especially when the story is this good and the world is so immersive. Both Colony Wars and Abe's Exoddus managed to average a score of 9.25 out of 10, which is just good enough to make it onto this list at number 10. For as dominant as the genre was in the 1980s and 90s, traditional shoot-'em-ups had gone out of style in the 32-bit era. The new technology allowed developers to give us immersive 3D shooters, which resulted in both critics and consumers flocking to Star Fox 64 and Colony Wars. But if we learned anything from the release of Einhander, it's that the side-scrolling shoot-'em-up still had a lot of life left in it. This was a chance for Square to show the world just how cool these games could look if they used the PlayStation's power correctly, and Electronic Gaming Monthly was eating it up. Einhander is the most cunningly designed shooter I've ever played, exclaims Crispin. He was one of the two critics that gave it a 9.5 out of 10, noting that the bosses are spectacular and the game is substantially longer than most shooters. John agreed with this assessment, but also added that Einhander is easily the best shooter to come along since R-Type. The only thing keeping him from giving it a higher score is the lack of a multiplayer mode. Craig, on the other hand, went for the higher score and talked about all the fun ways you could destroy the enemy ships. When I'm in a cruel mood, I love destroying the enemy's legs so it crumbles to the ground, or shattering its head so it bumbles around harmlessly. Yeesh, remind me to never get on Craig's bad side. The stunning graphics and the ability to destroy the bad guys in different ways was enough to earn Einhander an impressive 9.25 out of 10. Gran Turismo was more than just another racing game. It was a major sea change for console gaming. Prior to 1998, the racing genre was largely dominated by arcade ports, cartoony karts, and over-the-top racers that were usually set in the future. Just about the closest thing we got to a realistic racing game was Super Monaco GP, which ended up topping EGM's best reviewed list all the way back in 1990. But Gran Turismo was something different. It was a console game that not only tried its hardest to recreate realistic physics, but also gave us dozens of licensed cars, gorgeous real-world locations, and the ability to buy and customize your various cars with hundreds of parts. Even more impressive is the fact that Gran Turismo is the first racing game in 8 years to make EGM's best reviewed list without being published by Nintendo. Gran Turismo is loaded with so much depth, so many options, so many cars, so much variety, it just literally destroys anything that came before it, notes John Riccardi. Get used to this quote, because you're gonna hear it a lot. Gran Turismo is the best racing game of all time. Now, to be fair, there was some disagreement amongst the EGM editors. Dean pushed back by saying that this is arguably the best racing game, because don't forget about Need for Speed 3. Craig, on the other hand, actually had some complaints about this 2-disc behemoth. First, getting the different licenses is annoying. Also, there should be more American cars. I have an Acura Integra, and I'm disappointed that only the Japanese-styled one is in the game. I mean, that's just too bad, man. That's just how it goes. With the two Johns giving it a 9.5 and Dean and Craig going with straight 9s, Gran Turismo averages out to a 9.25 out of 10. "1998 was a solid year for the Nintendo 64, but you definitely wouldn't know it by looking over this list. Of all the games released this year, only Banjo-Kazooie found its way into the top 10. A far cry from 1997, when the trusty Nintendo 64 dominated nearly half of the chart. After honoring so many 64-bit racing games and first-person shooters, EGM was ready to get back to 3D platforming. Perhaps that's why they were so excited to dig into the deep world of Banjo-Kazooie, a game that most of the editors thought was actually better than Super Mario 64. What Rare has delivered here is solid gold gameplay, better even than Mario 64 starts crispin'. The dual character dynamic is ingenious, the fog-free graphics are flawless, the Nintendo 64's best, later stages are superbly challenging, and the amount of things to do and secrets to discover is immense. Almost daunting. John Davison was the only one to not give it a 9.5, and for some pretty solid reasons. So, is it a perfect game? No. There are two problems, one creative and one technical. Banjo himself is a tough character to really care about, and two, camera AI is frustratingly bad sometimes. But even with the slightly lower score, Banjo-Kazooie still managed to average a score of 9.4 out of 10. That's down just slightly over Mario 64's 9.5 average. Two decades before gamers fell in love with it all over again, Capcom released one of the most anticipated sequels of all time, Resident Evil 2. Coming only 2 years after the terrifying success of the original, this follow-up promised a bigger story that finally took us outside of that damned mansion. The result was one of the best survival horror games of all time. It's also a sharp turnaround for EGM, who just 1 year earlier had Resident Evil Director's Cut as the third worst reviewed game of 1997. We got more into why that happened in our last episode, but needless to say, everybody loves Resident Evil again. If any software developer wants to see how a sequel should be done, they should look at this game, explains Craig. He's quick to note that he didn't like the first Resident Evil, but absolutely adores this new one. That's a theme that's repeated throughout the reviews. John starts his write-up by saying that I was not the biggest fan of the first Resident Evil, but RE2 is everything the first game should have been. Dan echoed those sentiments by saying that the sequel surprised him, because let's face it, he wasn't that wild about the original. Even Sean calls the original a little overrated. I mean, seriously, did anybody like the original Resident Evil? I mean, except for the 4 editors that made it EGM's 4th best reviewed game of 1996. Did everybody in the staff that actually liked Resident Evil end up quitting? Either way, Resident Evil 2 averages a terrifying 9.4 out of 10. After 18 episodes, we've seen our fair share of genres on the best and worst list. We've talked about fighting games, shoot-em-ups, racing games, simulators, action games, and even weirdo releases that combine the two. Just about the only genre we haven't talked about in this series is the light gun game. Well, that ends today, thanks to Point Blank, Namco's clever party game that wanted you to get your whole family together to shoot at the screen. After years of stationary games like Duck Hunt and on-rail shooters like Time Crisis, Point Blank was a breath of fresh air, and I think you'll see why from these reviews. This is it, the best light gun game I've played in my entire life, raves Dan. This is not a light statement to make, especially when we have games like Virtua Cop 2 and Time Crisis. He loved the simplicity, the 8-player party mode, and the countless mini-games. Point Blank is one of those titles that you'd be silly not to have in your gaming library. John explains that it's so much fun and there's so much variety that it'll keep you entertained for weeks. Over and over they say that Point Blank is their favorite light gun game, which is probably why it picked up an incredible average of 9.4 out of 10. "1998 continues to be a year filled with firsts. We just talked about light gun games showing up for the first time, so I suppose it's only fitting to follow that up with another way to shoot things: the Game Boy camera. We've spent so much time talking about games that I had no idea that EGM was going to throw a hardware review at us. Yet here we are with this Game Boy add-on. You know, it seems almost quaint by today's standards, but you have to remember that this was a time when cameras weren't being shoved into every device you own. It was still novel to have a camera on your handheld game system, which might explain why everybody was so excited to take low-res black and white images that you could print out using a completely different peripheral. This little gadget has to be one of the coolest gaming peripherals I've ever seen, said John D. I don't remember the last time a crowd of people had such a laugh with something that is fundamentally so simple. Craig gave this add-on a 9.5 and accurately predicted the future. I fear for the teachers across the United States, because when this incredibly devious little device gets out, it's gonna cause a lot of chaos in classrooms. Crispin wrote the longest review and worried that the Game Boy camera might be a little too much fun. He called it the best peripheral of all time and gushed over the delay timer, time-elapsed snapshot mode, 4 mini-games, and the ability to assemble your pictures into a 47-frame movie. The 4 editors all gave it a 9.5 out of 10 and called the Game Boy camera the thing of the month. Panzer Dragoon Saga may not be the first role-playing game to show up on EGM's best and worst list, but it's definitely the rarest. After snubbing the original and the 1996 sequel, Sega's 32-bit fantasy series finally makes an appearance on a top 10 list. There's just one problem. By the time Electronic Gaming Monthly published their review, most of the 25,000 units released in North America had already sold out. It was even worse in Europe, where only 1,000 copies went on sale. And since Sega never got around to porting or remaking the game, all but a handful of people ever got a chance to play Panzer Dragoon Saga. That's a shame, especially when you read EGM's glowing reviews. This is an absolutely brilliant RPG that is exceptionally innovative and addictive, explains Craig. He loved the unique fantasy world that Sega created and the extraordinary battle interface. This was the general consensus at EGM, but a lot of the editors were ready to go stronger with their recommendation. Dan wrote a lengthy review concluding that Panzer Dragoon Saga is even better than the almighty Final Fantasy VII. Not to be outdone, Sean gave it a perfect 10 and gushed that this game is hands down my favorite RPG of all time. EGM begged their readers to buy this game immediately, and hopefully you listened. If you did, then you own an incredibly rare and collectible game that goes for a lot of money these days. Panzer Dragoon Saga averaged an incredible 9.6 out of 10. After years of dominating the charts, fighting games were suddenly having a hard time breaking onto EGM's top 10 lists. Despite notable releases like Tobal No. 1 and Soul Blade, you didn't see even a single fighting game find its way to the best reviewed games of 1997 list, as they instead opted to celebrate first-person shooters and cinematic role-playing games. With so much competition from emerging genres, fighting games were just gonna need to step up to the challenge and give us something truly special if they were gonna once again command respect on these charts. And you know what? It was Namco that accepted the challenge, and Tekken 3 was the truly special release that sent the industry reeling. The graphics are exquisite, the character designs are better than ever, the moves graceful while fearsome, and the control system is near perfect, explains John D. Oh, that pretty much sums it up, right? Nope, because the other John is ready to tell you why this game rocks. Never before has there been a fighting game that's this deep and this amazingly fun to play. Without a doubt, the absolutely best fighting game available for the PlayStation, bar none. He's one of the 3 EGM editors that gave the game a perfect 10 out of 10. Believe it or not, the only holdout was fake Ninja Sushi X, who called the game phenomenal before giving it a 9. His biggest complaint is that he preferred the classic 2D fighters over stuff like Tekken. Also, one of the extra modes is a pain in the ass. His slightly lower score means that Tekken 3 averaged a 9.75 out of 10, making it EGM's best reviewed fighting game of all time, a title that would be short-lived. From Ninja Spirit to Street Fighter 2 Turbo to Eastbook 1 and 2, we've seen the EGM editors give out a number of perfect 10 scores over the years. What we've never seen is a game that got perfect 10s from all 4 editors. Well, after 10 years and 113 issues, that incredibly difficult feat was accomplished by video gaming's greatest spy, Solid Snake. Like it or not, 1998 was the year of Metal Gear Solid, and not only got the most coverage throughout the years, but turned out to be one of the few games to actually live up to the hype. In fact, these EGM reviews suggest that Hideo Kojima's cinematic masterpiece exceeded all expectations and set a new high watermark for the industry. Unbelievable! Metal Gear Solid not only lives up to the hype, but surpasses it in every imaginable way, raves John R., repeating what I just said. I haven't felt this kind of overall satisfaction with a game since the glory days of the Super NES, with Super Metroid, Zelda, etc. An absolute masterpiece. Dan had a hard time finding the right word to describe a game this good. Metal Gear is simply incredible. Maybe incredible isn't strong enough of an adjective here. This game is so full of innovation, so full of surprises, so full of fantastic design that compliments don't do it justice. In Crispin's longer review, he tells you to forget about everything you think you know about the term interactive movie. He explains that Metal Gear Solid is easily the most cinematic masterpiece of game design on any system ever, and that it packs more twists than an entire season of The X-Files. He was impressed with the attention to detail in every part of the game and the heart-stopping boss battles. This is a sentiment shared across all 4 editors, which may explain why it's the first game to ever score an average of 10 out of 10. That's clearly an incredible milestone that deserves to be celebrated, but it does come with one small spoiler for the future. Metal Gear Solid definitely won't be the only perfect 10 from EGM, And you'll see why when we dig into the games from 1999. Hey, thanks for watching this episode of Electronic Gaming Monthly's Best and Worst. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we're going to be posting new episodes twice a week right up to the end of the year. Now here's the question I have for you. What is your favorite game from 1998? It doesn't have to be one of these games, of course, because there were a lot of great titles to choose from. Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back tomorrow with a look at the worst games of 1998, and it's a doozy. Just like this list, it's full of firsts. And that's not always a good thing. In the meantime, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.